Let me be real with you for a second. Most people walk past a bouncer like he's furniture. Like the guy checking EDs at the door is just a traffic cone with a radio. And honestly, that invisibility was the greatest education I ever got. Because when people forget you're watching, they show you exactly who they are. And nobody showed me more than the single mums. Not because they were loud, not because they caused problems, but because they carried something into every venue I ever worked that most people couldn't identify. This specific kind of quiet desperation, wrapped up in a really good outfit and a text thread with the babysitter. 7 years, 3 different venues, hundreds of Friday nights. What I'm about to walk you through is going to change the way you see these women entirely. Not softer, clearer. I'm on this channel, Brutal Relationship, because this is where the unpolished stuff lives. The observations that don't fit in a therapy session or a dating podcast. Just a guy who spent nearly a decade watching real people in raw moments telling you what he actually saw. Let's get into it. The woman arriving at the door isn't who you think she is. Picture this. It's 10:30 on a Saturday. Group of women rolling up. 3, maybe 4 of them, and one of them is slightly off from the others. She's dressed well, hair done right, but she's checking her phone while walking, not while standing still. She's laughing at the right moments, but her eyes aren't completely in it yet. That woman? She's been in parent mode since 6 a.m. She packed a lunchbox, argued about screen time, changed plans twice because the original babysitter cancelled, negotiated with herself in the mirror for 40 minutes about whether she even deserved tonight, and she's still not entirely convinced. By the time she hands me her ID, she's physically present, but mentally still somewhere between bath time and tomorrow morning's breakfast situation. Here's what nobody explains about that energy. It's not irresponsibility. It's decompression lag. The body arrived at the venue about 20 minutes before the mind did, and most people around her, including whatever man might approach her later that night, will completely misread what that looks like. She might seem distracted, a little guarded initially, quick to laugh but slow to relax fully, and the common interpretation is that she's uninterested, or stuck up, or a lot to deal with. Wrong on every count. She's running a background program in her head that never fully closes. It's just minimized, and understanding that single distinction will tell you more about single mum behavior in social settings than any podcast or Reddit thread ever could. Think about this. When's the last time you tried to genuinely enjoy something while also never completely turning off the part of your brain responsible for another human being's survival? That's not a Tuesday thing, that's every day of her life. So when she finally shows up somewhere meant to be fun, there's this adjustment period, this recalibration. Give it space. That's the whole point. Don't rush her into being on. So what do you actually do with this information? If you're trying to connect with a single mom in any social setting, bar, event, mutual friends gathering, doesn't matter. Patience in the first 15 minutes is worth more than anything clever you might say. Let her land. She got there. That alone required more coordination than most people's entire weekend. The hunger for being seen, and why it gets weaponized. Now here's where things get complicated, and I'm going to be straight with you because that's why you're here. Single mothers, particularly the ones going through the grind without much support, carry an almost invisible kind of emotional deficit. Not because they're broken, because the role itself is consuming. When you are someone's entire world, their chef, their nurse, their teacher, their safe place, their everything, you pour constantly, and very few people pour back. What that creates over time is this deep, legitimate craving to be acknowledged. Not pitied, acknowledged, seen as a full person, not just a function. I watched a woman, I'll call her Claudette, come through my line at the lounge for about 6 consecutive Fridays. Quiet, composed, came with the same 2 friends every time. Around week 3 I noticed she started staying longer each time. By week 5 she was the last of her group standing, nursing a drink at the far end of the bar, talking to a guy I'd been watching all night, with the kind of professional attention my job required. Here's what I want you to understand about that guy. He wasn't doing anything overtly wrong. He was listening, asking questions, refilling her glass before she had to ask, laughing at her observations, and from the outside it looked like a genuine connection. But I'd watched him do the exact same sequence with 2 different women earlier that same night. Same lean, same head tilt, same follow-up question after the laugh. It was practiced, polished, and it worked because he'd identified exactly what was missing in her evening. Someone making her feel like the most interesting woman in the room. Here's the thing most people miss entirely. That approach doesn't work on women who've been consistently seen, heard, and valued. It only lands on the gap. And a woman who's been running her life on empty for months has a gap that a practiced manipulator can spot the way a mechanic spots a worn belt, quickly and from a distance. This isn't a character flaw on her part. This is what happens when a legitimate human need meets a person skilled at faking the exact thing that fills it. The brutal math, loneliness, plus someone performing attentiveness equals a vulnerability that has nothing to do with intelligence. So what do? If you're genuinely interested in someone like Claudette, real, interest, no performance, the way you separate yourself is radical consistency. Show up the same way the third time you talk as the first. Don't escalate pressure. Don't manufacture urgency. Real connection doesn't have a closing window. If she senses you're working a timeline, you're done. But if you just keep being the same honest person each time, that sticks. Because novelty fades and consistency becomes safety. Safety is what she actually needs. The guilt loop is running every single night. Let me paint you a picture that I watched repeat itself so many times it started to feel like a pattern I could set my watch to. Woman comes in, energy's good, she's genuinely unwinding. First 40 minutes, she's there, present, laughing real laughs, not polite ones. Shoulders actually down, eyes not scanning her phone every 90 seconds. Then something shifts. Could be a song that reminds her of her kid. Could be a notification. Could be absolutely nothing at all. Just an internal timer going off somewhere in her chest that says you've had enough. And she picks up the phone, not to scroll, to check in, to make sure the world she stepped away from is still intact. Even when the response comes back completely fine, kid's asleep, everything's good, she doesn't fully return to where she was emotionally before she checked. That 5-second phone interaction costs her 20 minutes of presence. I started noticing this not because I was studying it on purpose, but because it changed the vibe at the door on the way out. Women who'd cycled through that guilt loop 2 or 3 times in one evening walked out differently, quieter, like they'd been having 2 separate experiences simultaneously. The physical one in the venue and the mental one at home, and both of them had been exhausting. Here's the psychological framework underneath this. There's a concept in emotional labor research around what happens when caregivers attempt leisure. The brain doesn't switch modes cleanly. It lingers. It audits. It asks, should I really be here? Even when the answer is unambiguously yes. For single mothers, this isn't occasional. This is the operating system. Enjoyment doesn't happen in full screen for most of them. It happens in a small window, with the rest of the desktop still running. Think about that for a moment. Real leisure, the kind that actually restores you, requires psychological safety, and psychological safety requires believing, at a cellular level, that the people depending on you are okay without you for a few hours. That belief is hard to maintain when you're the only safety net in the house. So what do you do about this dynamic if you care about someone going through it? Don't make her guilt worse by making your enjoyment contingent on her full presence. If she checks her phone, don't make a face about it. Don't say, you're always distracted. That guilt loop is already loud enough inside her head. What she needs from you isn't another voice adding to it. She needs someone who makes being present feel worth the internal battle she's already fighting just to be there. What the exit tells you that the entrance never will. 7 years at a door teaches you something that no book on human behavior ever quite captures. People perform on the way in. They walk tall, energy managed, face arranged. They're entering a space where they want to be perceived a certain way, so they show up as the version of themselves they've decided to be tonight. The exit, that's the real person. I've seen couples crumble in the parking lot after 90 minutes inside. I've seen friends turn on each other in the 10 feet between the door and the rideshare, and I've watched single mothers make that walk out in ways that told me everything about how their night actually went. The ones who genuinely recharged, and you could tell because it read completely differently from the forced fun of arrival, they moved with this quiet efficiency on the way out, already back in logistics mode but lighter about it. Phone out, texting the sitter, probably thinking about what time she needs to be up tomorrow, but there was something restored in the posture, something that wasn't there at 10:30 when she walked in. The ones who hadn't, they walked out with this particular kind of heaviness that had nothing to do with alcohol. It was the weight of having needed something and not quite found it, of having burned the babysitting budget and the emotional courage it took to get dressed and leave the house, and come back to the same internal quiet as before. That's the part that wrecked me, honestly. Not the dramatic stuff, the quiet stuff. Because what most people don't account for is the cost of going out for a single mum. It's not just the financial side of a sitter and a night out, it's the logistical planning that starts sometimes 2 days earlier. The arrangement negotiations, the outfit decision that required 10 minutes of self-convincing, the permission she had to give herself to even try to enjoy something, All of that is overhead, and if the night doesn't pay off emotionally, that overhead feels like a debt. Here's what the parking lot actually taught me about what single mothers want in a connection. Not rescue, not a hero, not someone who arrives saying, "I'll fix everything." That framing, as romantic as it sounds, treats her like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be known. What she actually wants, what she's quietly auditioning every person who comes close for, is reliability without theatre. Can this person just be a consistent, calm presence, without making it about what that earns them? Can they handle the fact that her world is genuinely complex without retreating, or trying to simplify it on her behalf? That's it. That's the whole test. The adjustment. Nobody warned me about. There's a particular thing that happened over my years working venues that I never expected to have opinions about. But here we go. The women who came in as full, complicated, vibrant humans, and there were so many of them, had a tendency to return with slightly less of themselves each time they'd been through something disappointing. Not all of them, but enough that the pattern was undeniable. A woman I'll call Priya came through my line for about 8 months. First time I saw her, she had this energy, opinions about everything, laughed at her own jokes first, the kind of person who makes the whole group louder just by being in it. Somewhere around month 4, something shifted. She was still there every few weeks, but quieter, more careful, like she'd learned to take up less space. By month 7, she barely made eye contact at the door. I don't know the specific story. I never asked. That's not my place. But I'd seen enough versions of that arc to recognize what it usually meant. Someone had made her feel like her full self was too much, and over. Time she'd started editing. This is what extended disappointment does to people who started out whole. It doesn't break them dramatically. It shaves them, slowly. And by the time they're deep in it, they've handed out so many small pieces of themselves trying to fit into someone else's comfort zone that they've genuinely lost track of where they ended and the accommodation began. Here's what that means practically. If you're building something with a single mother who's been through this kind of gradual erosion, and many of them have, you're not starting from zero. You're starting from a place where trust has been made expensive, where openness has a price tag attached because the last few times she was open, it cost her. That's not baggage in the negative sense people use the word. That's information. It tells you what the environment did to her, and it tells you what kind of environment you need to actually be. So what does that look like on a Tuesday night when there's nothing romantic about it? It looks like keeping your word on small things, like not reacting badly when her kid gets sick and plans fall apart, like not keeping score on who reached out last or who planned the last thing. It looks boring from the outside, but from the inside, for a woman who's been through the edit cycle too many times, boring consistency is the most romantic thing you could possibly offer, because she's not looking for fireworks anymore. She's looking for solid ground. The real takeaway: from 7 years at that door, I want to bring this home honestly. I wasn't a therapist standing at those doors. I wasn't a researcher with a clipboard. I was a guy doing a job, checking IDs, managing lines, keeping the peace. But that job gave me an accidental front row seat to hundreds of real human moments that most people never slow down enough to notice. And what I kept coming back to, over and over again, across 3 different venues and 7 years of Friday nights, was this. Single mothers are some of the most underestimated, overjudged, quietly extraordinary people, moving through public spaces every weekend. They show up after logistics that would exhaust most people before they'd even left the house. They carry guilt like a second coat they can't take off. They've often been burned by people who saw the gap before they saw the person, and they keep going anyway, not for applause, not for anyone's approval, because the kid at home needs them to be okay, and being okay sometimes means going out for 4 hours and remembering that they're a full human being who existed before the school schedule. The men who actually build real things with single mothers, lasting things, not just temporary connections that fizzle when real life shows up, are not the most impressive guys in the room. They're not the loudest, or the most charming, or the ones with the best opening line. They're the ones who showed up the same way twice, then 3 times, who didn't flinch when the real schedule appeared, who didn't treat "I can't do Saturday because it's her weekend with the kids" as rejection, but as just information, normal information about a full life. They're the ones who understood, without being told, that they were not the most important relationship in that woman's life and were genuinely okay with that. Not performing okay, actually okay, because they were interested in her, not her availability. That's the thing the parking lot kept teaching me every single Friday night. The people who treated single mothers like they were complicated problems to be solved always left alone. The ones who treated them like they were interesting human beings worth being patient for. Those were the ones I watched walk out together. 7 years is a long time to stand at a door. You see a lot of things you can't unsee. Some of it is funny, some of it is heavy. But the stuff that stayed with me, the observations I'm still turning over years, later, almost always came back to these women, because they were doing something quietly heroic every single time they showed up, choosing themselves, even partially, even temporarily, fighting the guilt loop and the exhaustion, and the logistics and the self-doubt, and still getting dressed, still showing up. If any of this landed for you, whether you're someone trying to understand a person in your life, or someone living this experience from the inside, leave a comment below. Tell me what hit different. Tell me what I got wrong. I actually read them. See you next week.